Hi, welcome back to Open Hand Farm. Today we are in the sewing room. I have some mending techniques that I want to share with you. I am preparing to teach a 4-H group how to just do some simple mending, and I thought maybe you would like to come along for the journey. We are going to learn how to sew on a button and how to close a rip in clothing with what's called a ladder stitch, as well as doing some visible mending. So I hope you stick around and I hope you learn something. I know I had never used a ladder stitch and it was amazing to be able to learn something so useful. So come along and let's see what we can do.
In preparation for the class, I wanted to print out how to do the technique that I would be teaching them so that when they go home, they have something to refer to. I also made these button plackets, I guess you would call them, so that they can see not only how to sew on a button, but to figure out where to sew the button on. They would just open the buttonhole and make a mark where the button belonged. The button would then be placed on top of it. After tying a knot in your double thread, you would then go into the button from underneath the fabric. When doing a 4-hole button, you want to go crosswise in most cases. You don't have to. And continue doing that same vertical stitch several times, 3 or 4 times, before going on to the other vertical. You can come up from the bottom and go under the button if you like, and then put it into the hole from underneath to get the location of where you'll be sewing next. After you've sewn both diagonal holes 3 or 4 times, then it's time to make what is called a shank on the button so that it will be lifted up from the cloth. You come up from underneath the button and then you will wrap your thread fairly tightly around the button 4 times. Then you're going to put your needle back in under the button and come out the back of the fabric. And there you can see the shank. It's like a layer of threads, and this just gives you room to put your button in a buttonhole so that it's not flat against the fabric. You'll now tie off your button by just doing a little stitch on the back, pulling your needle through, and then put your needle through the loop of thread before you finish pulling it tightly, then pull it tightly and snip it off, and you have a button. Now you just put it through the buttonhole and it's lined up perfectly. Congratulations! Now we're going to learn about visible mending. One of my daughters had been to a class on this and it was very intriguing, so I thought I would teach it to the 4-H group. It's when you have a hole and you mend it without worrying about what it looks like. You can use different stitches, different fabrics, however you want to do it. Here's a sample where they just used threads to go through the hole and then did what is called a little seed stitch all around it to decorate it. Here's another sample of where they took a piece of fabric and used the seed stitch again to just go all over it. Now this one is quite fancy. They actually cut the hole in the shape of a heart and ended up with doing a running stitch all around it. My personal favorite is where different fabrics are used, like a patchwork, to do the mending. So that is the method that I want to try. The hole I have is a strange shape. I'm just going to cut some fabric to put under that hole as a foundation. This is called stitchery witchery or wonder web or whatever. There's several names for it, but it's basically a web of glue that you can put between the fabrics and iron them, and it holds the fabric in place. So I'm going to put this patch fabric under the denim. Then I'm just going to rip off some pieces of this webbing to go between the fabric and the denim around the hole. You want to be careful not to get it stuck between the two denim pieces, or you won't be able to put your leg in there. And you also don't want your iron to touch this because it will melt directly onto your iron. Once you press it, it holds. I did go in and cut the extra fabric off of the back so that it wouldn't be floppy. You could just sew around this as it is, like that heart one. My plan is to cut 3 different blocks to put in a pattern over that hole. So you will not see the material that I put under the hole, but it helps to stabilize it so it's easier to sew on. After cutting out my patchwork squares, I just played around until I liked the way they looked. I noticed that the edges of some of the fabric was already fraying, so I decided to fold my edges in. I will tell you that I used my big iron, which means you're probably going to burn your fingers. So there is an alternative. There is a mini iron that you can buy, and a lot of quilters use these on the seams of their quilts, and it protects your fingers. So if you do this a lot, you might want to invest in one of those. After I got all of the edges the way I wanted them, I went ahead and laid my pattern out and used some of that Wonder Under to hold them in place. Then I used a colorful cotton yarn and just threaded my needle, tied a knot in the bottom, and looked at the stitches, the running stitch, the seed stitch, and the plus stitch, and decided what I wanted to do. I'm just going to do a few things before the 4-H class, and then I'll probably do some during that and after, and come back and show you what I did. I went ahead and just did a simple running stitch all around the green. It was a little thick because of the fabric that I had blocked the hole with, plus the denim, plus the folded edges, but it wasn't too terrible to use. Now you could leave your raw edges and they will fray a little bit, but that would add to the design depending on what style you were looking for. On these blocks, I chose to just sew around the other blocks and not incorporate stitches on both of them. I was careful, as you'll see, to catch the corners of each block because I did not want those corners to come up and fray. After I got them all sewn down, I went ahead and pressed them again, and that just helped hold those edges down so that I could keep working. Now we're going to learn about that ladder stitch that I love. As you can see, we have a rip in this denim. It's kind of fraying, but it obviously needs some repair. So the first thing that you want to do is to cut off any fraying threads because you don't want them getting in the way, and just clean it up. Then you're going to thread your needle. I'm using white in this since I'm demonstrating. You'll want to tie a knot in one end and leave your tail on the other. The first thing you're going to do is come up about anywhere between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch below your tear. Then you're going to pick a side, it doesn't matter which side, and you're going to do one little running stitch close to the edge. Now, if you have fraying there, you don't want to do it in the frayed area or it will not stay. You want to go right outside the fray area. Then you're going to go across the tear and do the same thing on the other side. Do another little running stitch. Now these running stitches are very important. You can't just go side to side to side. You have to do that running stitch. So again, don't get in the frayed section. Then you're going to go across to the first side again and do another running stitch. And you're just going to continue this from side to side, do a running stitch until you get to the top of the hole. Now I will say, I don't think you need to go as closely as I did with your stitches, but it did a good job. I did try another one with the stitches a little bit further away from each other, and it worked well too. I wouldn't go as wide as 1/2 inch between your stitches, between your running stitches, because that might leave a gap that doesn't get closed. Getting close to the top here. You just want to continue and kind of veer in towards the point at the top if you can, as long as you don't have frayed fabric. Then you're going to eventually, on your last stitches, come out at the very top of the tear and then go in about 1/4 of an inch past the top to the underside. And this is when it gets fun. Notice how I didn't pull those stitches tight while I was sewing them. So what I'm going to do now is find my knot underneath the fabric, and I'm going to just hold that tight to the fabric so that I don't pull it out. And then with the end of the string that I've been sewing with, I'm just going to pull, and you'll see it get tighter as you go. Now, this one, I had trouble, like I said, they might have been a little close. So I pulled from both ends, and it did close up. And all I did was go ahead and re-knot that bottom string, and it wasn't a problem at all. But as you can see, it does an amazing job. So now we want to turn it inside out and tie off your knot. So there's a little ridge area that the stitches make. So I just went into that ridge area, went through my loop, and finished it up. The string that was left at the end, I put it into my needle and tied it off just like I did the other end. So if you're thinking you might need to pull from both ends, if you have a really long cut in your fabric, you might want to leave a longer tail just so that you can be sure to have enough to tie off. Now we'll just turn it right side out and look really hard to see where that is. Actually, you'll see a little bit of a gap at each end from where you had to go off to the side a little bit. So if you just press that, it does an amazing job to just hide those little puckers and make it look, well, I won't say brand new, but it sure looks great in comparison to the way it did. And remember that I used white thread on this, and if I had used blue thread, you wouldn't be able to see it. I was pretty impressed.
I'm back with you after I had my 4-H sewing class on how to mend clothing. It was fun. We had 4 kids and 3 moms, and I think everybody learned something. So I taught you how to do the ladder stitch earlier, and I have to tell you that I used that. I don't think I showed you, but I had caught my garden jacket on a nail and I ripped it like a L shape, and it was just like flapped open. So I used the ladder stitch to mend it, and it worked really well. It was funny because right before the class started, my neighbor across the street, about a 16-year-old boy, he has brought a lot of things over for me to mend. And right before class started, he brought a coat over and said, hey, it just has a seam ripped open under the arm. So I was wondering if you could fix it. I was like, perfect day for it. Sure. Turned out, again, I just used the ladder stitch, and I don't even think you can even tell where it was. It worked really well to just close up a seam. So now he can have his coat back. I also did more on my visible mending. I just did a few more stitches. So here's what that looks like now. That was really a lot of fun. My daughter came over and was talking to us, and I just sat and was stitching. I think I might give this a try on some other things that I have. And you don't even have to use this for mending. You could just add some stitches to something that needs a little extra style. Well, thanks a lot for hanging out with me today. It was fun to be here, and hopefully you were able to learn something from this class. Be sure and subscribe and push the like button if this was something you enjoyed.